Now, as the situation continues to worsen in war-torn Sudan, the United Nations says 25 million citizens, which is half of the country's population, is in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Since the latest eruption of the conflict between Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces about 9 months ago, more than 9 million people have been uprooted from their homes, with 1.6 million fleeing to neighboring countries. Now, just yesterday, the International Committee of the Red Cross in the United Nations held a Sudan Emergency Response Plan meeting in efforts to address the growing humanitarian crisis. To expand on this, ICRC Regional Director for Africa, Patrick Youssef, joins me now to talk a little bit more on the outcomes of this meeting. A very good morning to you. Thank you for your time. So we understand that this is a conflict which broke out in April last year, and since then, millions of people have been displaced and even thousands more killed. With many conflicts around the world, certainly it gets busy for humanitarian aid organizations such as yours, the ICRC. What are the humanitarian needs that you're dealing with on the ground in Sudan?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, and thanks really for highlighting the plight of the Sudanese people, those who have suffered for the last 10 months an armed conflict that has been deadly at all levels. The humanitarian needs are those of a population that has lived with very few, has left its home, and is unfortunately either stranded in a street, in a makeshift camp, or indeed hosted by another family. So the main needs today are related to security. People have the right to be secure even if a war is raging and happening next door or in the other governorate. When they flee, and they fled, Sudanese have fled several times, their needs grow indeed with time. So the main needs are related to the basic services that they require. Food, water, medicine, surgical needs are rising because indeed the country is out of some of the main hospitals that were running before the conflict.
Yeah. I know you're in Geneva at the moment, and perhaps expand a little bit on the discussion on the emergency situation there, the response plan, and the key issues that that meeting tackled, of course, bearing in mind the civilian population has been badly affected.
You know, it was a very timely meeting that the UN has called for, namely OCHA and UNHCR, to address the international community and the donor community on the plight of the Sudanese and the need indeed for an increase, a surge in the humanitarian response. The ICRC has gladly accepted the invitation also to be part of that effort because we know that humanitarian needs are rising and the attention is unfortunately not where it needs to be. We know that all eyes are today on the Middle East for very good reasons, but this is no reason to forget all the other contexts and conflicts like the one raging in Sudan. So yesterday's call for action was indeed very useful, but also quite resounding in the sense that the states need to be able to put as much pressure to stop the bloodshed, but also increase their humanitarian donorship, because the needs are rising. And you mentioned yourself, 25 million people today in one country require as much assistance as those affected by a war in small parts of other countries. So Sudan today is really at the brink of an implosion if the situation continues as such.
Yeah. With this emergency response plan geared on focusing on the needs of the refugees, are there concrete, solid plans for the high number of affected civilians?
So there are two plans that were launched yesterday by the UN. One is clearly geared towards people inside Sudan, those internally displaced. And the UNHCR High Commissioner Filippo Grandi mentioned or spoke about indeed the plans outside of Sudan for the refugees that decided to leave their homes but also cross the border. For the ICRC, our plans have not changed. Our plans have been to work inside the country and across the region, and namely with the support of the Sudanese Red Crescent, the South Sudan Red Cross, and so many other Red Cross and Red Crescents present on the ground. We have the clear plans to be able to surge where needed, either in Darfur, in Al Jazeera, in Kordofan, but also in the east where our teams are still quite active. Yesterday's meeting was basically a call for action, but also a call for donorship. And we're happy that the work of our institution did not stop, even if we were still, like others, struggling with the financial year 2023 that was quite difficult. But indeed, the plans are today set to be able to respond. Now the question is to have access to the population, is to cross over the administrative impediments that would not allow you to get into the country without obviously a visa, travel permits, etc. So what is really needed today is to work hand in hand with all the authorities, but also remind the parties to the conflict the need of the commitments that they made in Jeddah in May 2023 to respect and uphold the principles of international humanitarian law.
Yeah. As you interact with some of your teams on the ground, how are they handling this as they encounter really scenes of horror and having to deal with the heavy load in terms of the psychological impact?
It's huge. I mean, you know that 98% of our staff are from Sudan. They have been displaced several times. One of our colleagues has lost a leg recently because of an attack, so family members have been scattered. You know, you cannot expect a colleague to be able to work when all his family is scattered between Egypt, the Central African Republic, and some are lost. So it's not easy, but I think I have never seen such a drive from the Red Cross and Red Crescent teams to be where they need to be, not to disappoint anyone in the country and try their best, although, again, the risks are so high for an organization like ours that crosses front lines and that deals with parties of the conflict. We're not geared only towards just dropping food or delivering water. The main purpose of the ICRC's work is really to help or push and encourage the parties, but also show the way on how one can respect international law, how the protection of civilians, the protection of hospitals, those who have lost their freedom because they were detained because of the war, all of those being catered for, indeed create a better path for peace, rather than building your war simply on violations of the law that we see everywhere in Sudan.
You speak about some of the challenges that come with the outcome of your meeting. I mean, access to the population, administrative impediments. With those challenges, on the back of this emergency response plan, what gives you hope that there can be some sort of change that you'll be able to enact?
Well, first, what gives me hope is really the openness of the parties. I've been in Khartoum. I was in Port Sudan, then in Khartoum at the end of November. And I did hear from both parties the willingness to be able to open up and support the humanitarian response as much as they can. Now we have to realize that this is a huge country and that the front lines are moving every day, every other day. When our teams were in Madani, a 2 hours drive from Khartoum after the beginning of the conflict and the eruption of the violence all across the capital, we see ourselves at the beginning of the year moving again out of Wad Madani to Kassala or to Port Sudan because of the violence. So it's really not easy, but I'm hopeful that because of the gravity of the situation and because we are in an irreversible space of humanitarian needs, that the parties really be able to at least put their differences aside and allow humanitarian organizations to perform their duties in Darfur, but also in the East. So my hope is really built on the promises and the aspirations of both parties to see that humanitarian action is indeed put in a neutral space and not politicized.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That's where we leave it with ICRC Regional Director of Africa, Patrick Youssef, talking about the situation, the worsening situation in Sudan.